Welcome, everyone, to lesson 1. This is exciting. Of decisions of fate. So today we're going to be talking about, what are we talking about tonight? We're going to be talking about, I forgot. We're talking about experimental treatments. It's on the board here. Experimental treatments. The question we're going to be asking tonight is, what does Judaism say about experimental treatments? Are you allowed to just try any experimental drug if you want? Or is there some sort of guideline that Torah mandates to us to look at? And the real, we're not going to have a discussion. It's not going to be, we call this course, we're going to be talking about Jewish medical ethics, right? But we're not going to have like a discussion. Like, what do you guys think the ethical thing to do is? I mean, obviously, we're going to be asking what you guys think. But what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to look at what does the Torah say. What is the Torah view on what is ethical versus what is not? So we're going to start and we're going to begin by watching a video. And the video is a case study about a girl. Her name was Rada. And she was diagnosed with some very severe illness. I can't even pronounce it. It's called MLD. And there's no known treatment for this illness, but there is a company which is doing some tests on a certain drug that could possibly be a treatment for it. And he goes into his whole story about how he tried to get this drug. So let's watch the video and let's see what happens.
When Radha Patel first entered the world, nothing seemed amiss. She was a bright-eyed child who had met her early milestones until it came to walking. She went for physical therapy, but her initial progress suddenly slowed dramatically. Soon after her second birthday, Radha was given a brain and spine MRI and genetic analysis. The results were devastating. MLD, metachromatic leukodystrophy.
Metachromatic leukodystrophy, or MLD, is really a devastating condition. It's a single gene disorder. Children are born normally, but in the most severe form of the disease, after a year or so, they start to lose normal function. They stumble, they lose the ability to walk, they're confined to wheelchairs, they have epileptic seizures. And in the most severe form of the disease, 50% of children unfortunately die by the age of 5, and there's almost 100% mortality by the age of 10.
Radha's prognosis was grim. The Patels sprang into action, researching fanatically for a cure in the race against time. Surely, they reasoned, in an era of gene editing technologies, there must be a cure for a single enzyme deficiency. Sure enough, Shire, a biotech company specializing in rare disease solutions, was developing an MLD treatment. But there was a catch. Medicines require extensive testing and collaboration. The good news was that Shire had started the process. Their Phase 1 trial delivered the required rudimentary degree of safety and effectiveness. Shire was gearing up for Phase 2, a comprehensive trial to complete the process. The bad news was that the second trial would occur in several months' time, and that would be too late. For the drug to be effective, Radha needed it immediately. But the Patels were optimistic. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration runs an expanded access program, also known as compassionate use, that approves investigational stage medication. At the time, the program worked like this. A doctor with a terminally ill patient who had no other treatment options could ask a pharmaceutical company for an investigational drug that had undergone a Phase 1 trial. If they agreed, the doctor could apply for FDA's consent. With those two approvals in hand, the patient could access the coveted cure. On their end, the FDA simplified the procedure and granted almost all requests. However, getting the companies to agree was another story. Companies need to demonstrate that their products are safe for public consumption. They are reluctant to provide a drug prematurely outside of a clinical trial. What if the patient suffers injury or death for reasons not directly related to the drug? Will that unfairly torpedo their chance of receiving FDA certification? That's a valid concern, which the FDA has addressed, but for some companies, it is not enough. Corporations have another fear. If they freely provide individuals with experimental drugs, they will have a hard time finding candidates to participate in their trials. Put simply, they might save a few lives in the interim, but fail to complete a drug that could save countless future lives. Is that concern valid in a case like Radha's? Certainly not. If a patient with a fast-moving disease is not treated immediately, they will be unavailable for future trials. Radha's doctor asked Shire for the drug. To their dismay, the request was denied, with no clear reason provided. All approaches to the company were rebuffed, and Radha's only hope was dashed. The federal government has since allowed terminally ill patients and their doctors to bypass the FDA.
Good news, in my opinion, actually unadulterated good news. The right to try legislation has passed the House. This bill allows terminally ill patients to try experimental drugs and treatments that may not have received FDA approval.
However, it refuses to force the hands of the pharmaceutical industry, and the keys to life remain in the pocket of individual corporate decision-makers. This leaves us with some dilemmas. Experimental drugs can be highly potent. They have not yet been approved as safe and effective. Is it appropriate to supply them to people suffering from life-threatening illnesses? And if so, under which circumstances? And is it appropriate for governments to compel drug companies to provide access? If so, under which circumstances?
It's very serious stuff here. This whole discussion of what we call the right to try is a little bit controversial. So let's just go through some of the ideas here on the board. Some of the reasons why people would say that we're against the reason why someone would say you're against the ability to try a drug that's not yet regulated is, number one, it could be dangerous. That's pretty obvious. Number two, we don't know if it's effective. And number three, it could also cause unnecessary suffering. And number four, it also gives people a sense of false hope, that they're hoping for something. Oh, hey, we have a new drug. It's on. Oh, whoops. We didn't really do any testing. We have no idea. It's just giving people a false hope for something that's not really there. The reasons to say that people should be able to try it is, number one, people have the right to make their own choices. People say, my body, my choice. I should be able to, if I think that it's worth trying, then let me make my own choice. And another reason for it would be that regulations add a bureaucratic red tape, meaning that obviously you have to test everything a million times to make sure that it's safe and effective. But sometimes it could be safe and effective way before, and they just have to go through all of this red tape to make sure that it's on the market properly. But really, someone could have saved their life months earlier without all this red tape. So those are just some of the ideas. So if you look at your page 7 in your book, we have an exercise here. And I want your opinion. We're going to go through this exercise at the end of today's class based on everything we learned today. But just for now, we're going to go through this. Question 1. Do you consider it appropriate for individuals suffering from life-threatening illnesses to be granted access to experimental drugs that have not yet been approved as safe and effective? And if yes, under what conditions? What do you guys think?
Yes.
You think yes? Unequivocally.
Because
Always.
people who have terminally ill children or parents are looking for anything, any kind of help. And
Even if it's unsafe, or even if
if the person might die if they don't get any kind of treatment, then this is an idea of getting some kind of hope. They could live
Okay.
with it. If they die, they might have died anyway without it.
So what if the doctor says you have 8 years to live? the doctor tells the patient you have 8 years to live. But if they take the treatment now, they could die tomorrow.
They could, they might not.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But you're saying that, no, that's, 8 years is still worth gambling over.
Well, an example is my mother-in-law was very sick. And we asked the doctor, will she make it past Rosh Hashanah? Yeah, sure. We don't see any trouble. She died before Rosh Hashanah. So they don't know.
Of course they don't know. Absolutely. No.
So if
So-
this could possibly extend life,
But again, they don't know. That also they don't know. So what's the possibility here? Especially when it comes to like a surgery where they're going to operate on a person's brain, we know for a fact that that's dangerous. We don't know whether whatever they're operating on is going to even help. But either way.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You have that. You should have some kind of. I know you said that they don't know. It's pretty much hope and faith, but you have to have some kind of test. You have to have some kind of something to lay down with it, saying, well,
You think you need to have like a phase 1 trial, basically,
Right.
saying that we've done our initial testing, it looks good, and now anyone can try it.
right, now anyone can try it, but how safe is it? What are the circumstances of the person? Does the person have any pre-existing heart disease? Does the person have any pre-existing, blood disease?
Yeah, absolutely.
Any pre-existing disease or medical situation where maybe the person wasn't as strong, last time, and now here they are in the hospital saying, well, God help me, hopefully this will work. But you don't know. I mean, it's to me
Yeah.
it's a 50-50 draw.
Well, I think really every patient has to be evaluated differently. For someone, it could be an incredible hope and possibility, and for someone else, it's the possibility is so slim, and it's almost not worth taking the risk for. So, I think everyone has to be evaluated differently. But either way, let's go to the next question, and that is: are there any circumstances under which you believe that drug companies should be required to provide access? So in our case with RADA, the company, Shire, didn't want to allow them to use the drug. And they didn't really give any reasoning. They just said they denied it. But some of the reasoning why people would say, some of the logic why some companies would deny access is because if, let's say, they do give it to someone and that person dies, whether from the drug or not, it looks bad on the drug. And that drug will never go to become FDA approved and never be able to help so many more lives if it really is effective. So by letting them just let anyone try, you're not really allowing the drug to be tested properly. So when you allow the companies to say, hey, you have to give. So I mean, the question we're asking now is: would there be a case where you would tell the drug company, you have to give us access to these?
What happened with COVID vaccines?
What happened with COVID vaccines?
They rushed it through.
No, but the companies rushed it through. I'm talking about, would there be a case where we, as the people, or someone trying to try out this experimental drug, would be able to tell this company, hey, I know you guys don't want to let this drug out now. You're still under testing, but we want to try it. Would there be a case where you would say, yes, this company would have to let this person try? Or say, no, the company has a choice to let them try if they want, and if not, then,
Well, they open themselves up to liability.
Oh, exactly.
If the person
Absolutely.
dies, yes.
So you're saying if the company doesn't feel it's safe and worthwhile for them to let the drug out, then there's no reason you should be able to force the drug company to allow the drug to be used.
No, I think there should be efficient tests. There should be tests first. There should be theories, not just theories, but there should be tests first, proven tests where people have lived for a long time.
So you're saying once it passes a certain stage of testing, then the drug company should be forced to allow the drug to be used if people want to try it. Is that what you're saying?
I'm sorry, say it again.
I said, I'm asking, is what you're saying that once a certain initial testing has been done, then we should be able to force the company to allow the drug to be used by people who want to try it.
If the people want to try, yes. So,
Yeah.
yes. But they have to be willing to do it. You can't.
Of course, yeah.
Just go in and say, look, you should try this.
No, of course, because you're not going to give a drug to someone if they don't want to try it. That's obvious. That I think we could all agree on. But yeah, let's see what's going on today. Okay, where are we holding here? When it comes to the Torah, there's a big question we have to ask, and I know that for some of us it seems obvious, but from a religious perspective, is a person allowed to go to the doctor for treatment? And here's the argument. God gave someone an illness, and we believe everything comes from God. So God gave someone an illness. Now this person says, I have an illness. So now let me go to the doctor. The doctor gives me a prescription. Okay, now I got the illness. Now the illness is gone. Doesn't that feel a little bit like we're kind of like derailing God's plan? In other words, shouldn't there's many reasons God would give someone an illness, but it would seem, especially in today's world, this question is I guess more relevant today than ever, because there's so much medical treatments that almost feels like there's so many medical problems that are not even a problem today. It used to be, someone had a fever, it was a big deal. Today you have a fever, you go to the doctor and rant, you get your temperature, you can take some medication and, drink some water, get some rest, and, tomorrow you wake up and you're fine, It almost feels like we're just like we're like, we don't believe in God anymore. So from a religious perspective, how is it that a person's able to go to a doctor, or are you able to go to the doctor? Now, obviously, I know we go to doctors, but I'm just talking about, theoretically. So if you look at Maimonides, text 1, he says as follows: it is a positive mitzvah to remove any obstacle that might pose a danger to life, and to be extremely careful regarding these matters, as it is stated. This is Deuteronomy, straight in the Bible, straight in the Torah. Be cautious and preserve your life. This is text 1, page 8. Sorry, didn't say the page. So be cautious. The Torah says, be cautious and preserve your life, right? But be cautious and preserve your life can be talking about not putting yourself in danger, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that if God gave someone an illness, they're able to just go and circumvent that. But we're not done. Let's look at text 2a. This is from the Torah. The Torah says that if men quarrel, that means if men get in a fight, and one strikes the other with a stone or a fist, and the victim does not die but is confined to bed. In other words, they got really hurt. If the victim subsequently gets up and walks around outside on his staff, the assailant is clear. In other words, he's not responsible for any murder or he didn't actually kill him. He's alive and he even walked around. He pays only for the victim's involuntary idleness. In other words, his loss of work. What?
Confinement to bed.
Yeah. Well, there's a medical term where you pay for someone. You pay for the fact that they can't work anymore. It's like workers' compensation. I don't know the term. Yeah, is that what it's called?
Workers' compensation.
Yeah.
Where you have somebody who cannot work and somebody who is stayed up in bed.
Yeah. So this guy has to pay for that work that he's now missing, and he has to provide for his cure. In other words, what does cure mean? He has to go to the doctor. You see from the Torah that we do allow people to go to the doctor. As we see in text 2b, here's a statement from the Talmud. This is from Baba Kama. Right? It says as follows: the school of Rabbi, this is page 10, text 2b. The school of Rabbi Yishmael taught, he must provide for his cure. That's what we just read. He must provide for his cure. That's the verse from the Torah. This informs us that physicians are granted permission to heal. Because we see that the guy has to pay for his medical bills. Where else does he go for medical bills? He goes to the doctor. So the guy has a broken leg. So he goes to the doctor and the doctor heals him. So here we see that the Torah does allow a person to go to a doctor to be healed. And now if you look at page 11, text 2c, this is Rashi. Rashi is one of the most famous commentaries on the Talmud. And he writes, he's the most famous commentaries altogether, but he writes in the Talmud on that right there, and that section, he writes, we do not argue. He says, God has struck, will the physician then go and heal? In other words, yes, we believe that the illness comes from God. God gave this person an illness. But the person also has an obligation to heal himself, as we read in the Maimonides, which says that the Torah says, be cautious and preserve life, means that we have to do whatever we can to extend life. Yes?
Okay, so I have a question.
Yes.
Let's say I have a situation
Mm-hmm.
and I can either choose to have an operation to go one way or choose not to have the operation and see if I'll heal myself. Am I obligated to get an operation if that is the way to the cure? Like to get rid of the cancer? Do you have to remove the cancer, or can you say, no, I don't feel like going through that treatment. I'm just going to see if I can heal myself.
It's a good question. I think I think you need some more information, because the we're going to talk a little bit more about it in today's lesson. But I think the real question is, what happens if I just let myself deal with it on my own? In other words, let my body heal myself. Could the person heal themselves, or are the person definitely going to, not make it past a certain amount of time? And by doing the procedure, are they definitely going to make it past that certain amount of time, or not? And if they won't, then that's really what today's lesson is all about. That's the experiment. That's what's really, we're not only talking about pharmaceutical drugs, we're talking about anything. If there's a surgery or procedure that could possibly extend someone's life or possibly shorten someone's life, am I allowed to, or maybe do I have to, try and do whatever I can to extend life? Or maybe, if it's risky, it's risky. I shouldn't do it. That's really what today's lesson is all about. So I guess save your question and we'll talk about the end, and then we'll see if you still have a question. If not, then we'll talk about it. So we have two things. We have preserving life. That's number one. The second thing we have is, we have, in preserving life, there's two aspects. In preserving life, there's two ideas. There's number one, avoiding danger. That's what the Maimonides says. Be cautious and preserve life. Right? That's what the Torah says. We have to make sure that you're not to run into the street and say, listen, if God wants me to live, I'll live. It doesn't work like that, because we have an obligation to protect ourselves, not put ourselves in danger. The second idea is that we have to pursue a cure, and if there's a possibility that someone could get healed, right? So if someone gets hurt and they need medical treatment, there's a mitzvah in the Torah to go find a cure and get help, because there's a mitzvah to extend life, preserve life, and part of that is pursuing a cure if there is one. So these two ideas are two aspects of preserving life. We're going to get back to it in just a moment. I want to kind of get into a little bit the philosophy here. So we mentioned the question, can a person go to a doctor? And by the way, I want to point out there are some religious people, not Jewish, but some religious people that actually believe that you're not supposed to go to doctors. That if God gave you an illness, you got to live with it. There are people that believe that. Judaism doesn't believe that, because we just showed that the Torah says you should go to the doctor. But the question really is why? If God did give a person an illness or some sort of disability, maybe they should say, that's how God wants me. Who am I to start going and changing everything up? What's the philosophical answer to that question? So let's look. If you look at page 15, there's a text 15, a statement from the Midrash. This is Medrash Tzimura. And they give a little bit of a story, but the story is very profound, and it gives us a little bit of that philosophical answer as to why a person can go to a doctor. This is what it says. When rabbis Yishmael and Akiva and another individual strolled the streets of Jerusalem, so they met an ill man. He wasn't doing well. Rabbis, he asked them, tell me how I might be cured. So they answered, do such and such until you're cured. That's what they replied. This man responded. He said, who afflicted me? He pressed. God, they responded. You have interfered in an area beyond your jurisdiction, the invalid retorted. God inflicted me, and you advise me how to be cured. Are you not defying God's will? This is the very question we just asked. So the rabbis responded, what is your occupation? What do you do for a living? I'm a farmer, he replied. This is my scythe in my hand. Scythe is like a stick that they use. They pressed further, who created the vineyard? God, came the reply. You interfere in an area beyond your jurisdiction? They countered, God created it, and you're cutting its fruits. So the rabbi said, God created a beautiful garden, and you're sitting here cutting the fruits. How dare you? Destroying God's beautiful garden. So the man responded, do you not see this scythe in my hand? He rejoined, if I did not plow, trim, fertilize, and weed, nothing would grow. It would just be a barren field. Foolish man, returned the rabbis. Have you not heard the verse, as for the human, their days are like grass? This is from Psalms. Just as a tree will not sprout without the farmer weeding, fertilizing, and plowing, and after sprouting, it will not live without water and fertilizer, but will die. The same is true with the human body. Drugs and medication are its fertilizer, and the doctor is the farmer. In other words, the Medrash was posing the very question we just had, and that is, how are you able to go to a doctor, get a treatment for an illness that God gave you? Are you not circumventing and just going around God's world? So they responded, you could ask the question really about anything. You talk about a field. You're allowed to just go ahead and cut the fruits. How dare you? They're God's fruits. God may put them there. Maybe he wants them there, right? Rather, the rabbi said, just God, we're like partners with God. God gave us an opportunity, a blank canvas, in order to be able to create this beautiful vineyard. And it's our job to plant, to fertilize, to water, and grow these amazing vegetables and fruits, and then cut them and use them. That's why God created the field. And the same is true with the human body. God gave people illnesses for whatever reason, but those illnesses we are meant to take them and try to do whatever we can to heal them and make our body whole and healthy. And in the example, the doctor is the farmer. So we mentioned that medical treatment is an obligation. The Torah says you have to avoid danger, number one, but you also have to find a cure. And then now we're talking about the fact that we're partners with God in this scenario. We get, God forbid, an illness, but we also now have to try and find that cure in order to get rid of that illness. The Maimonides, the Rambam, takes it a step further. And he says, and interesting, this is text 4. I'm not going to read it inside, but I'm going to tell you outside. The text 4, he writes that you could ask the same question about anyone. Let's say someone's hungry. You could say, oh, maybe God made me hungry. He wants me to be hungry, right? Who am I to give myself food, right? Obviously, they'll be foolish. No one would say such a thing, right? Rather, why did God make us hungry and then give us food so that we could get rid of just make us not hungry, right? Why think about it. God made us hungry and then told us go find food. He could have just made us not hungry. And then we wouldn't have to it's like a circle he created. Rather, Maimonides says that the reason why we are hungry and we want food and we have to go get food is because every time we get food, what do? We make a blessing. And we thank God for the food that we eat. We do the blessing before we eat the food. We do a blessing at the end, Birkat Hamazon, after we eat food, after we eat a meal. So it gives us an opportunity to thank God. So the Maimonides said the same thing is with any medicine. When a person gets sick and they go to the doctor and they get treated and they come home and they say, wow, Baruch Hashem, thank you for healing me. Thank God I'm well and I'm fine. Obviously, if a person was just always healthy, they would never have that opportunity to really thank God for their health, even though technically you could always thank God for your health if someone's always healthy. But unless someone gets ill and then becomes healthy, they could really make a proper thank you. In fact, many people, when they get into a serious illness or sometimes even a serious crash where their life is threatened, and they get better, they get healed, they make what they call sudat hoda'ah, which means a thank you meal, a meal of thanks. They invite their friends, they have a dinner, and they invite their friends. It's like thank you to God for saving my life, right? So this is what gives us the opportunity to thank God. That's why Maimonides says it's part of our partner in creation. And there's many things throughout our prayers that we actually say blessings for healing. In the Amidah, we have a prayer. We say this 3 times a day. Rifa'enu Hashem Elokeinu. God, heal us. Right? Because we believe the healing, where does it come from? It comes from God. Now, yes, we have to go to the doctors, just like we have to go to the farmers for food. But we know that food also comes from God. Everything comes from God. So we still believe in God. We still have faith in God. We thank God for everything. But we still have to do our part and make sure that we heal ourselves properly. Now, this is all good and fine. But there's a unique feature when it comes to the Jewish view on this whole thing. Really, yeah. The interesting Jewish view here is that, according to the Jewish perspective, is that our bodies don't really belong to us. God gave us this gift of life really as a deposit. Our bodies were given to us by God to fulfill our life's mission, and we must do all we can to upkeep our health. But our bodies are not really ours. In other words, in Judaism, to say, hey, it's my body, I can do whatever I want, is not really a valid argument in the Torah, in Judaism, because our bodies belong to God. So the question really we have to ask is, does God allow us to do this to our bodies? One of the reasons why tattoos are not allowed in Judaism. Because you're not allowed to write on your body. It's not your body. It's like, imagine, going to someone else's textbook and just start writing doodles. It's not yours, right? So it's part of the same logic. So let's read text 5. This was from page 18. This is from the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement. He was a master halachist. He wrote in his Code of Jewish Law. He writes as follows: "It is forbidden to hit another person." That's obvious. We know that. Even with their consent. That means even if a guy tells you, hit me, according to the Torah, you're not allowed to hit him. According to Jewish law, you're not allowed to hit him. Why? For we have absolutely no authority over our bodies to permit that they be struck, denigrated, or pained in any way. So what he's saying is that I can't tell someone, hurt me, because I don't have the authority over my own body to be able to say, hurt me, hit me. How much more so when it comes to treatments and stuff like that. So now we have a very big question here. We're a little bit stuck, right? Till now, you could say, hey, listen, take the gamble if you want. But if the Torah doesn't allow me to take a gamble, God doesn't allow me just to take a gamble with my body, then the question is, does God allow me to take the gamble with my body? In other words, if it's God's body, God has to give me permission to take the gamble. So let's look at exercise 1-2. Is an interesting question. Okay? Based on the Jewish approach to health and healing outlined above, do you consider it appropriate for individuals with life-threatening illnesses to turn to experimental drugs that have not yet been approved as safe and effective? So in other words, here's the real question. The question here really is, let's look at a slide. I think this slide is going to help us here. When it comes to preserving life, we said we have two aspects. We have avoiding danger, and number two, pursuing a cure. Now, generally, they pretty much go hand in hand, because avoiding danger is also part of pursuing a cure. Yeah, don't jump in the road when there's cars coming, and also go to the doctor. That they go hand in hand, right? The doctor will tell you, don't do such and such because it's dangerous, right? But there are some cases where avoiding danger doesn't equal pursuing a cure. You know what that is? Experimental treatments. When you have a drug that's not been tested, the very drug that could be the cure could also be the danger.
Okay, so here's a question.
Yes.
Do Orthodox Jews believe in vaccines to prevent illness?
When you say Orthodox Jews, you're making it sound like everyone has one opinion. Well, I don't think there's.
Okay, what is the Jewish opinion on the flu shot or the shingles vaccine?
In those cases, first of all, the flu shot, I don't even know if it really is part of the same discussion because it's not life-threatening. Getting the flu, I don't think is life-threatening. And getting the vaccine for the flu, I don't either think is life-threatening. So, what? Okay, one second. So, I'm saying for the flu shot, I think I think everyone would agree. It would just be up to your preference. If you want to get the flu or you don't want to get the vaccine, I don't know. When it comes to the COVID, it starts to get a little more complicated because there's a lot, because they put it out very early and there wasn't a lot of testing done.
Experimental.
Yes.
There's a lot of controversy. We're going to talk about it today's lesson. What exactly the situation is. Now, we're not going to talk about vaccines specifically, but we'll talk about in general experimental treatments and we'll see what happens. We'll see what we come up with. But I don't think there's a orthodox view.
Okay, for example, there's a vaccine that I was against when my kids were growing up, that it was to prevent sexually transmitted diseases.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see a need for it. But then later on, they come up with the fact that, well, if you don't get this, your child could get cancer later in life. So then what do you choose?
It's a big question. I don't know.
And if the doctor tells you, yes, it's necessary for these kids to get this vaccine, what are you supposed to believe? And then my daughter has gotten the vaccines for COVID, and she had to get the hepatitis B vaccine, and she had horrible side effects. She was hospitalized twice because of it.
I think that a lot of it we're going to see in today's lesson. But after the lesson, if there's still not clear what the Torah view is, then I guess we'll continue to discuss.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
So, what if you're talking about, so my body belongs to God, but so I'm laying there in the hospital and I want to make that decision. And what if I decide against what God's thinking? And I say, well, I'm going to go ahead and take it. So is that a bad thing? Is that something that I'm going against?
Are you assuming that God says not to take it?
Yeah.
Okay, it's not so simple. What?
No,
Well,
that's what I'm asking. I mean, so,
well, and that's really the question. Does God say?
It's my body, but it's not my body, as you said.
No. Yeah. So what's your question? What's your question? So let's say you take it. So now what? God's going to be mad at you?
So, well, God will never be mad at me. Okay, I know that. But the thing is that the fact that I went against him, I went against because he thought it was better for me to not take it, and I decided to take it. Does that make sense? Does that make sense?
I don't know.
What, are you asking a question, or are you?
I'm asking. Yeah.
What's the question? I don't know.
The question is if I go against God's word, okay?
Yeah.
And take the medication because I thought it would be good for me. So,
I'm not hearing the question.
where you're talking about how it's.
You're asking, are you going against God's word if you take this medication when
Right.
God would say not to?
Right.
Yeah. Basically, that's exactly our question. Our question really is, that's really what we're asking right now, and that is that if I want to do what God wants, I like God. He's a buddy of mine. I want to do what He wants. I want to make Him happy. Should I go with this experimental treatment? And I'm pursuing a cure. It's part of the Torah. On the other hand, I'm also going against the Torah. I'm also going against God because God says avoid danger. It could be dangerous. Or do I say, no, I'm going to avoid danger because the Torah says avoid danger. Or, right, but on the other hand, I'm not pursuing a cure when I could be pursuing a cure, and that's also part of the Torah. So that's really the question we're having. What does God want me to do? Now, obviously, if a person chooses against what God wants, he's going to have to take that up with God. I'm sure God will deal with him according to each person individually. But we're asking, if a person wants to do what God wants, what should they do? That's really the question. I think we're a little behind here, but let's move on. There's two terms I want you guys to know. Whenever you learn a new subject, you got to learn like the jargon of like when you start to learn medical. You got to learn when you get to the medical field. You learn all the terms and the meaning of different things. So here we're going to learn two terms here. It's in Figure 1.1, page 20. Page 20. It says there's a first term is called chayei shaah, and the second one's called chayei olam. Chayei shaah means short-term life. Chayei olam means long-term life. When a person is, God forbid, has a terminal illness, and they only have a couple months to live, that is what we call short-term life. I'm talking about the next couple months. Long-term life means longer than that, right? It means a regular, a couple years, let's say. I got time, When someone has time, they all of a sudden, life's good. They don't worry about anything. And the second, I know a guy here who they told him that he has like very little to live. Thank God he surpassed the doctor's prognosis. But in the beginning, the second he heard it, he was like, his whole life was like, just became upside down, because you hear that now you're in chayei shaah. Now you're in this short term. There's a window here. This is the end. I see the end, and that's very, very scary for many people. So we're going to talk about here is when it comes to chayei shaah, which means short term life. Shaah comes from the word moment, like an hour, but it doesn't literally mean an hour, but it means you have a short term. We're talking about someone has very little to live. The secular view would be, hey, listen, there's nothing to lose. If the treatment fails, there's nothing to lose if the treatment fails, and since the patient's lifespan is already limited, then let's go for it, right? The person only has a couple months, or even maybe a couple days. Let's say a couple days. They have a couple days. If they don't do something right now, they're gonna live. The person's only gonna live a couple of days. If we intervene, then yes, the person could live a lot longer. So what do I have to lose, right? But the Torah is a little bit different. The Torah, the Jewish perspective, is that there is something to lose. You know what a person could lose? Those days that a person has to live. Every single moment of life in Judaism, according to Judaism, every moment of life is precious, even if a person only has a couple of days. So saying, oh, hey, what do I have to lose? What do you mean, what do you have to lose? You have those days or those months, and trying something earlier could be shortening that person's life. And that's something very serious and not to be taken lightly. So the question here, we're making the question even stronger, and that is, am I able, according to Judaism, according to the Torah, jeopardize my chayei shaah, my momentary life, for a possible chayei olam, for a long-term life? That's the question here. If you look at text 6, page 20, the Maimonides writes, the Rambam writes regarding someone who was found, a house collapsed on Shabbat, and someone was found inside the rubble. Now, there's a general rule that on Shabbat, on Shabbos, you're able to circumvent any laws. You have to throw the whole rule book out the window to save a life. So here's what he says. If a building collapses on Shabbat, and we are unsure whether someone is buried beneath the rubble, we must clear the rubble as a potential rescue attempt, although such activity is generally prohibited on Shabbat. You're not allowed to, start moving rocks around. But if we think that there may be someone there, then we're able to put on our jeans, put on our t-shirt, and take our flashlights and start searching. If we indeed discover a living person, even if they are crushed by debris to the extent of being mortally wounded, that means that they're mortally wounded, means they're not going to live a lot longer. But they're alive. Right now they're alive. Their heart is pumping. We nevertheless continue clearing the rubble off the victim to allow them to live even that short while longer. So think about it. We know that this person is going to die within the next, even let's say another couple minutes. Literally the person's loss of blood, there's no chance. Now today, the question is a lot, obviously we're going to save the person because of the medical advances that we have. An ambulance comes and you just throw them on, you get blood, you could figure it out. But in those days, this is Maimonides writing this almost 1,000 years ago, they didn't have those kind of things. So here you see the guy's losing blood. He's not going to last long. Are you able on Shabbat to start to, pull him out of the rubble? And, obviously that's against the laws of Shabbat, but he's not going to live for that long. So yes, you can violate Shabbat to save a life, but are you saving a life? So Maimonides says, absolutely. Those minutes are life. And life is life. It doesn't matter how long it is. So here we see that Judaism values even a little bit of life. Every single moment is sacred. Every single moment is holy.
But if it risks your life to save that life?
Yeah, it's another question. That's another question. But right now we're talking about if it's not going to risk your life. I'm just talking about violating my Shabbos, my Shabbat. So the Rambam says that I'm allowed to violate my Shabbat, even if it means saving a life for a couple of minutes. I'm saving a minute of life. The whole Shabbat goes out the window. That's how important life is, even minutes of life. How much more so days, how much more so weeks, how much more so months, and how much more so years. So if you could save a person, if obviously take it the other way, if a experimental treatment could cause a person to lose a couple months of life, it's not something to be taken lightly. Do we say, hey, listen, go ahead, try whatever you want? Or does Torah say, hey, this is life you're playing around with. You can't just throw life out the window.
That's a real
Yeah, it's a real balance. That's really what makes this question so. A lot before you come to the class, you could think like a whatever, choose whatever you want, But when you start to see it from a Jewish perspective, it's actually a very big question. And rabbis have grappled with this for many, many years and debated it. It's not so simple. So let's look at text 7a, page 21. This is a answer from Rabbi Yaakov Reisher, who's a rabbi in several communities in Germany and France, a renowned rabbi and a halachic authority, and he writes as follows. Page 21, text 7a. I received an inquiry submitted by an expert doctor regarding a terminally ill patient. The unanimous medical prognosis is that the patient will die within the next couple of days. However, the physicians suggest that there is a medicine that might cure him, but might cause him to die within a couple of hours of taking it. Is it permitted to administer the medicine? So again, the guy's living according to the doctors, and I guess obviously, like you said, the doctors aren't prophets. They don't necessarily know everything, but we're gonna have to go with what we know. According to the doctors, and it sounds like there were many doctors who agreed that this person has a few days to live. If they take the medicine, he could possibly die within a few hours, which means you're going to be shortening the person's life by a day or two. The question is that he was asked by this doctor, according to the Torah, according to Judaism, what would be the right response? Should we say, let's take the gamble and possibly extend that life beyond a couple days? Or say, listen, we have a couple days. God's given him a couple days. Let's value those days, make those days as meaningful as possible, gather his family, gather his friends. And if God wants him to live longer, then I'm sure he'll live longer. But we're not going to sit here and try and alter it and possibly decrease it.
Okay. So
He continues. What?
well,
He's going to give us an answer, by the way. He's not going to leave us hanging.
I just wanted to add something to that. But go ahead.
What do you want to add?
Well, my mother was injured. She fell out of the chair and injured her arm. And the doctors did not want to repair her arm. So they released her to hospice, where I don't like hospice at all. All they do is drug you until you die. They don't repair anything. They just drug you until you die. So what does Judaism say about that? About hospice?
I'll be honest, I don't know enough about hospice, but if what you're saying is right, correct, that they don't try and extend life at all, then here's really the question. Here's really the question. According to Torah law, if someone is so ill that if by moving their bed they can possibly die, then you're not allowed to touch their bed. That's how much Judaism values life. So the question really is, if a person's in hospice, and I guess maybe you could say it's the same question as what we're asking right now, do we say that, hey, listen, we got to pursue the cure, let's go after whatever we can, try and preserve life as much as possible? Or do we say, hey, no, that could also be maybe doing something that could decrease their life, and let's allow them to at least live whatever they have? So that's really the question that we're having here. So it really depends on the situation. That's the proper answer. But we're going to talk about what the answer is. Hopefully I finish this before the lesson is over. Okay, so he says like this, the second paragraph, text 7a, page 21. My response, this is what he says, my response is that this is a matter of life and death, of course, which therefore requires exceptionally careful consideration. It is necessary to thoroughly review the relevant passages in the Talmudic and halachic codes. For one who kills a single individual is considered as having destroyed an entire world. And conversely, the act of saving a single individual is considered as having sustained an entire world. That's from the Mishnah and Sanhedrin. So we see that the Torah does put a lot of value on life. So what does he say? In other words, before he gives his answer, he wants to let you know that this is a serious question. It's not something to be taken lightly. Whatever his answer is, don't just say, oh yeah, of course. It's not so simple. So he goes on to say, apparently, in other words, I first want to suggest, this is what his first suggestion is, it would seem appropriate, this is text 7b, by the way, page 22. Apparently it would seem appropriate to apply the principle of shev va'al ta'aseh, which means it is preferable to let the situation sit where it is and make no proactive move, out of concern for the preservation of chayei shaah. Because again, chayei shaah means we're trying to preserve the short-term life. We know that the person has a couple days. That was what the doctor's prognosis was. So the question is, so here he's saying that my first initial thought would be, let's at least let the patient live his couple days, instead of altering it to possibly live a couple hours. And he continues, this consideration applies even in the case of a goses. A goses is a dying patient in the final throes of life. This is his initial answer to the question. This is my initial thought, he writes. The term shev al ta'aseh means like sit and don't do anything. In other words, if someone's in a situation, you're in a situation, you're not sure what to do, the Torah, the general view in Judaism, and this goes throughout the entire Talmud and halachic rules, is that it's always better, if someone's not sure what to do, it's always better to do nothing. Because if God truly wants something to happen, he could always intervene. He's done miracles before, he could do miracles again. You know, going and altering something that could possibly be the wrong thing to do, it's always better to say, hey, you know what, I'm just going to sit here and let God do his thing. So that's his initial thought. But then he goes on and he brings a Talmudic statement. And this is text 8a, page 23. But I'm just going to give you some background here. In the Talmudic era, there were these doctors that were non-Jewish, heathen doctors that were very anti-Semitic, very hostile to the Jewish people. So much so that Jewish people were scared to go to them for medical treatment because they were scared that they would kill them. They would just slip them some drug and be like, oh, whoops, you didn't make it. That's how scared they were. So the Talmud says as follows, text 8a, page 23. Rabbi Yochanan stated, when it is doubtful whether an invalid will live, an invalid will live or die, and the only physician available is a heathen whose animosity towards Jews leads us to suspect that he might deliberately kill the patient, we do not approach that physician for treatment. However, if we are certain that without treatment the patient will die, we may approach that physician for treatment. So it's interesting. What does the Talmud say? I'm just going to pause right here in the middle. The Talmud says that general, you're not allowed to go to the doctor because we're scared he's going to kill the patient. But if there's no other treatment, there's no other hope, the only hope is to go to this doctor, Talmud says you're allowed. Talmud continues, the Talmud asks, are we not placing the patient's chayei shaah at potential jeopardy? That's the very question we had this whole lesson. You're telling me that the guy is able to go to the doctor, but the doctor could kill him. So if he doesn't go to the doctor, you never know. He could live another week or 2 weeks, maybe a month. And now you're going to the doctor and he could kill him tomorrow. How are you able to do that? The Talmud responds, in such a case, the concern for chayei shaah can be disregarded. In other words, because you're pursuing a cure to possibly extend the person's life, you're able to say, listen, we're able to take the gamble. That's what the Talmud's saying. So let's just review for a second. Let me just catch up here. Here we go. Here's the review. So this is on page 24. He says as follows. Number one, look at the state of the patient. Let's say perhaps the patient will die if untreated. So they may never make it. But also, perhaps the doctor will kill the patient. So the Talmud says you're not allowed to go. Because we don't know, maybe the person will live, maybe the person will die without the doctor. And going to the doctor is another possibility the person will die. But if the patient will surely die, and that's the real key here, the patient will surely die if untreated. In other words, it doesn't go to the doctor, we know he's going to die. And what's the nature of the doctor? Perhaps the doctor will kill the patient, we don't know. So then the Talmud says you're able to go to the doctor. This anti-Semitic doctor.
Wow.
What's wow?
It doesn't really resolve the issue.
No, not at all, not yet. But what we're trying to point out from the Talmud, here he's trying to bring a precedent. This is Rabbi Yaakov Reisher. He's trying to prove from the Talmud that the Talmud is basically saying that you're able to pursue a cure or an experimental treatment, even if it means there's some sort of danger. That's what he's trying to show from this statement from the Talmud. So if you look at text 8b, page 24, here comes interesting the Talmud responds and says as follows. This is on that same passage. It says as follows. On what grounds are we permitting to waive the concern for chayei shaah? So the Talmud is not letting up. Yes, very nice. Rabbi Yochanan said you're able to go to the doctor even if it means there's a potential danger, but because there's a possible cure. But the Talmud says, how do you know that? Where do you know that from? Rabbi Yochanan just making that up? Rabbi just making stuff up? Where do you know that from? So the Talmud tells us where it's from. There's a story in the Torah. There's a story in the Torah, and if you could actually read it, you have it on page 25. We're not going to read the whole thing right now. I'm going to read just sections of it. I'll just tell it to you outside. You can read it in your own time if you want. But the story is as follows. There was a king. His name was Ben-Hadad. He was the king of Aram, and he besieged the city of Samaria, which is basically next to Jerusalem. Now, basically, in that time, there were two kingdoms. The kingdoms in Israel, like, split up into two kingdoms. There was the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel. And this king, Ben-Hadad, was the king of Aram, and he came to attack the Jewish people, and he sieged the entire Samaria. What happened was there was a famine so bad that they were selling a quarter of a kav of dove's dung for 5 silver pieces. And some people try to explain, like, why was that? But basically, some people were saying that the reason why they're doing that is because they were actually still intact kernels of barley or wheat or something, and they were able to at least, like, eat that. Like, there was so much hunger. Some people went to cannibalism. It was really bad. It was a really bad situation. So during this whole situation, let's look at text 9, page 28. During this whole story, the Torah continues and says as follows: Four men stricken with tzara'at lingered outside the city gates. They told each other, "Why should we sit here until we die of starvation? If we decide to enter the city, we will die there due to the famine in the city. If we stay here, we will also die." So these four guys, tzara'at, by the way, is this disease which these four people got. It's a disease in the Torah that people get if they don't act properly. One of the reasons is by talking bad about someone else, or there's other reasons. But here, these people had this disease, and they have to be outside the city. Being outside the city, they didn't have any food. But guess what? Inside the city, there was no food either. So what do? They're going to die. So what do they say? So they continue. Second paragraph, text 9. So now let us go and defect the Aramean camp. If they spare us, we will be provided food and remain alive. And if they kill us, we're going to die anyway. In other words, what do we have to lose, right? We're going to die either way. But if we go to the camp, we possibly live. So what ended up happening at the end of the story was they went to the camp, and there was no one there. There was a bunch of tents. There was a fireplace that was just put out. There was the people's slippers. There was food. Everything was still there. The beds were there. The tents were there. Everything. And they were like, "What's going on?" And they started eating. And they in the end, they went back to the city, and they told everyone that the army left. And everyone came and they ate. And basically, what ended up happening was the army heard people coming, and they thought it was like a big army, and they left. It was an incredible miracle. They fled. They just left everything. But either way, this Rabbi Yaakov Reisher wants to point out from here that what's the point? The point he's trying to say is that these people were going to die. They were in a situation of what we could call terminal illness because they had no food. So they decided to go take a risk. They could possibly die earlier. They could get their head chopped off by the enemy, but they could also get food. So if we see from here, text 10, page 29, if the possibility exists for this treatment to completely cure the patient from his illness, we can certainly disregard the concern for chayei shaah. This approach has clear precedence in the aforementioned Talmudic case. Consequently, in our case, since the patient will certainly die without intervention, we ignore the certainty that he will survive on his own for a few more days, and seize the chance of fully healing him. And continues, the above decision notwithstanding, a physician must not take this decision lightly. It is necessary for the physician to weigh the situation carefully, to consult with the other expert physicians in the city, and in case of a divergent views, to abide by the consensus of the majority of experts and to procure the agreement of the local halachic authority. So in other words, what does he say? He gets rid of his initial thought, which is shev al taseh, just sit and do nothing, let the person's life go as it is. But then he says, no, short-term life is able to be risked if failure to act will result in a loss of a chance at long-term life. In other words, a person is terminally ill, and they don't have, we know that they don't have a long time to live. So you're able to take that risk to possibly extend that person's life. That's what he writes. So it seems we would have an answer to our question, right? That the answer right as of now would be that if a person knows they're going to die without any treatment, they are able to opt in to take this experimental treatment to possibly extend their life. If we think maybe it could cure them, and maybe it could heal them, and maybe they could live a lot longer. And the logic is, because life is so important, that any life that we could extend, it would be highly encouraged to do so. Well, we could end the class here, but that would be no fun. But we're going to make it a little more complicated. The question we're going to ask now is, how do we define? We need to define a couple more things. When we say someone has a short amount of time left to live, what does short amount of time mean? What do you think?
It could be a day, could be a few hours.
Okay, would a couple months be a short amount of time?
Yeah, absolutely.
Would a couple of years be a short amount of time?
Anything less than
Anything less than?
forever.
Than forever. But no one lives forever.
Right.
So you're saying you could always...
Forever,
It's relative to the age of the person,
right.
right?
I don't think so.
Or maybe to say, like,
That's interesting. I don't think Judaism ever cares how old you are, because according to the Torah, age is just a number. No, I'm kidding. Age is very, very relative, because it used to be people lived for 900 years, and then people lived for 180 years, and then it used to be people lived for 60 years, and then it started to go down, and now it's going up. So who knows how long you're going to live? You tell me this guy's 80 years old, so now he's not allowed to try something? He could live to 120. We bless people all the time out until 120. So I don't know if age is really a factor. Age could change so dramatically, especially if they do the treatments and they try the experiments. You never know. They try all the experiments. Maybe some of the experiments will be able to work, and the guy will live to 120. So I don't know if age will ever be a good factor. But the question really is, we have to define it. What is... We know that chayei shaah, we're balancing chayei shaah versus chayei olam. Chayei olam means long-term life. Chayei shaah means short-term life. Chayei olam, long-term life, means a person's long-term life. Right? I think we could all agree that, long-term life is also very debatable.
Yeah.
Right? But the real question is, what is chayei shaah? Where do we draw the line? At what point? We know definitely if someone has a couple days to live, we know that that's definitely chayei shaah. That's very short term. But what if a person has a couple of months? What if that person has a couple of years? Is that still chayei shaah? Can a person opt in for an experimental treatment if they only have a couple years to live? In the case of Rada, which is the case we brought in the beginning of the class, she has a couple of years. Would that be considered chayei shaah?
Is she still alive?
That's a good question. I didn't look that up. Maybe we'll look it up afterwards. It only happened in 2019, so it's very possible. Very possible. The second question we have to ask is, how much risk is permitted?
Exactly.
When you say this person hits a risk, whoa. What kind of risk? Like 50% chance the person will live, 50% chance the person will die? Like, what's the risk? What if there's a 10% chance that it could work? Do we still say, yeah, take the risk, even though it's only such a small chance that it'll even work? So how do we define that? And again, because we're trying to follow the Torah, what does the Torah consider short term? What does the Torah consider risky? How much risk would a risk taker take if a risk taker could take risk? So let's there's a little bit of a debate here. Here's where it gets very debated, because these are very, very modern, contemporary halachic authorities debating this. This is all, if you look at these guys, this guy lived text 11, page 30, Rabbi Avram Yitzchak Cook lived 1864 to 1935. That's 1935. That's not that long ago. And there's other people. This is all last 200 years this is all been debated, because really this whole question of experimental treatments is really fairly new, because this whole medical field has grown a lot in the last.
And the question is, do you just trust conventional medicine, or do you trust Asian medicine, Chinese medicine?
That's a good question. It's a good question. The general the Rebbe's view on medicine was that you ask a doctor, and if they say one thing, then you get a second opinion, and if they argue, then you get a third opinion. And if the third opinion agrees with one of the opinions, then you go with that. But at the end of the day, whenever it comes to listening to doctors, you always have to have some sort of faith in God. And we spoke about this in the Rebbe's Advice for Life last lesson. And that is that you have to trust in God at least a little bit, because yes, doctors don't necessarily know everything. So we have to trust. So if you just three doctors, two of them said go with it, and one doctor said don't go with it, then you can say, hey, listen, I'm going to trust in God. I'm following my doctor's orders, and I'm going to go with it. And hopefully everything will go well. But here's an interesting thing. So let's look at text 11, page 30. This is from Avram Yitzchak Cook. He writes as follows. The boundary marking the transition from chayei shaah to chayei olam, he wants to draw a line here, is not clearly delineated. What? What's so funny?
It's not clear.
Yeah, but he goes on to say, however, it is logical to assume that as long as we know that the illness is already terminal, in other words, that they will die from this illness, regardless of how much time will pass until death arrives, it is considered chayei shaah. So he says that terminal is terminal, even if the person will have 8 years. So in the case of Rada, would it be considered chayei shaah? According to Rav Yitzchak Cook, absolutely, because it's terminal. And even though she'll live 8 years, I think that was the number that they gave, at 8 years old, the girl probably won't live past 8. 8 years, but nevertheless, because it's terminal. And because it's terminal, you could consider a chayei shaah and go with any experimental treatments necessary. Continues, the problem is many rabbinic authorities actually argue. In fact, most rabbis argue with this statement, because it really doesn't make any sense, because someone can be terminally ill for years. And they could definitely die from this illness, God forbid, but it'll take decades before it'll actually happen. So it would be crazy to say that chayei shaah, which means short-term life, is terminal illness, and just throw out a blanket statement like that. So a lot of people argue, and they say that it has to be shorter than that. It has to be shorter than that. So let's look at text 12. This is from page 31. This is from Rabbi Shlomo Kluger, and he writes as follows. The definition of chayei shaah, he argues, that the definition of chayei shaah is not clearly spelled out in Jewish law. It is clear that life expectancy of 1 to 2 years cannot be considered chayei shaah, because if so, what is chayei olam? What is long-term life if already we're talking about years of life is going to be considered chayei shaah, which means short-term life? So what's chayei olam then? So he continues, after all, everyone is mortal. And what difference is there between 1 year, 2 years, and 100 years? Seeing that no one lives forever, are we to categorize all life as chayei shaah? Maybe 100 years is chayei shaah, right? Maybe that's also short-term. 100 years, not that long, right?
Because none of us knows when we're going to die.
Absolutely. 100%. That's his logic. So nor does it appear correct to say that chayei shaah only refers to a situation in which the patient will die from the specific illness for which they presently seek a cure, and not from other ailments. Yeah. What difference should it make what illness will cause the person's death? In other words, if the person's going to live a couple months, who cares what he dies from? It seemingly, we should try to preserve life regardless of whether he's terminally ill or not. Rather, it would appear, this concludes, that just as a treifa, and we're going to explain treifa in just a second, just as a treifa is defined as an ill person or animal that will not live more than 12 months, similarly, anyone whose illness will prevent them from surviving more than 12 months has entered the category of chayei shaah. Conversely, if the illness will cause death only after 12 months, The interval is not considered chayei shaah, but chayei olam. So he says something very interesting. He says, what's a treifa? You ever heard of the word treif?
Not kosher.
Yeah, so most people translate treif as not kosher. That's what most people will let's loosely translate it, but that's not what treif means. Treif means, it's actually a specific law in the Torah, and that is that when an animal, let's say you have a cow, the animal is attacked. And what happens is the animal is attacked so much that it's in danger. And it won't live more than 12 months. So even if you would slaughter the animal according to Jewish law, and it's a cow, so it's kosher, and you slaughtered it according to Jewish law, if you checked it and you saw that the internal organs were damaged or torn, or there was something, a defect, that they wouldn't allow the animal to live more than 12 months, you're not allowed to eat the animal. It's not kosher. And that's really where the word unkosher came from, because what happened was people had farms and they would bring it to the shochet. The shochet would do the ritual slaughtering. They would bring it to the rabbi to make sure that it checked and made sure that it wasn't considered a treifa, when it wasn't treif, right? Obviously they had a kosher animal. They wouldn't bring a non-kosher animal to the rabbi. They were bringing kosher animals, but the kosher animal could be not kosher if it won't live more than 12 months. There's a bunch of halachic guidelines, what is considered an animal that will live more than 12 months, and you could they check the lungs and they check different things to make sure that it's a healthy animal. And this law is extended to any illness. If the animal had an illness that wouldn't allow it to live more than 12 months, you're also not allowed to eat it. It's not kosher. So either way, he says 12 months is categorized in the Torah as is not able to live more than 12 months. So he says the same thing should apply to an illness. Someone who can't live more than 12 months, we should apply that same logic that the Torah gives to animals, and by the way, also humans. There are certain cases where they evaluate whether the person could live more than 12 months. So he says, let's just apply the same definition of chayei shaah. Short-term life means 12 months. That's what he says. So let's just review. Okay, well, let's go. We said, what's the difference between chayei shaah and when is it permitted? So we said, the treifa, what do you say? An animal that's mauled or has a disease and won't live past a year. So here's the thing. What is considered chayei shaah, which means short-term life? We have two opinions. Rav Kook says any terminal illness, right? But then we have a lot of people that argue with that. Mainly, we brought Rabbi Kluger, who says if a person is going to live less than 12 months. Okay?
The doctors are wrong.
Doctors are wrong sometimes. Yes, that is true. But we have to go with what we know. We can't go with what we don't know. So obviously, yes, you could always question and say, hey, maybe the doctors don't know. But if the doctors say that the person will not live more than 12 months, then we have to go with the information that we have on the table. And if there's a possibility of extending that person's life beyond 12 months, then that would be an incredible opportunity and you would be able to take a risk because you're considered chayei shaah. If a person has very little time left to live, less than 12 months, and therefore they would be permitted to take a risk in preserving and extending that person's life. Now the question really is, what risk can you take? How big of a risk? So let's look at text 13. Here comes something very, very interesting. This is from page 33. This is from Rabbi Eliezer Yehuda Waldenberg, known as the Tzitz Eliezer. He writes as follows. This is regarding risk factor. How much of a risk is a risk? So he says, however, this permission to operate is valid only if the chances of life and death as a result of the surgery are equal, but not if, in the majority of cases, the patient will die as a result of the operation. So he's talking about a surgery. They're doing an operation. So he says, if there's a 50-50 chance, we don't know. Maybe the person will live, maybe the person will die. So he says, if there's a 50% chance or less that he'll die, then you're able to take that risk. Because there's also a 50% chance or more that they'll live and will extend the life. And that's a big mitzvah. It's something that's very important. However, Rabbi, if we're gonna apply that, by the way, to a experimental treatment, a drug, let's say, that would imply that if there's he says that if there's there has to be more than a 50% chance that it'll be successful. In other words, if not a more than a 50% chance that it'll be successful, then the Rabbi Eliezer Yehuda Waldenberg would say you can't take that risk because there has to be at least a 50% chance it'll work. Continues text 14, page 34. Rabbi Chaim Ozer Grudinsky argues with Rabbi Waldenberg, and he writes as follows: when faced with a case in which there is no alternative hope for patient survival, we disregard our concern for chayei shaah in exchange for even a remote possibility that the patient will be healed. So he says that it doesn't matter. Even if there's a tiny possibility, the smallest possibility of success, that it'll be successful, and the person will live longer than expected, he says take the risk. Then you're able to take the risk. No, he doesn't say you have to take the risk because, again, it's a big question, but he says you're able to choose to take the risk. Now, a lot of people argue with that and say, come on, you can tell me if there's a 3% chance that they'll be successful, they'll just take the risk. So some people argue and they say they have a middle ground. They say if there's a lot of rabbis who say 25% chance, 30% chance of success rate, then you could go ahead with it. But if it's less than that, it's already too much of a risk. But either way, we see there's literally two opinions. One opinion says 50% chance, has to be at least a 50% chance success rate. The other Rabbi Chaim Grudinsky says that even if there's a small chance that it'll be successful, then you're able to go ahead with it. And some people want to add and say that's really only when you know that there's a cure. You're only allowed to take that risk when you know there's a cure. So for example, the case that we brought from the Torah about the Mitzorayim, the guys who had Tzoraas, they were outside the camp. They knew that there's food in the Aramean camp. They just weren't sure if they could get there. But they knew for sure if they could get there, they're going to have food. So they knew for sure that the cure is there. They just weren't sure there's a risk to take here. So some people want to say that you gotta, factor everything in. If you're taking a drug that you have no clue if it's going to work or not, but it could also kill the person, then you got to factor all that in. So it's not necessarily going to be so accepted. But Rabbi, just to finish off here, text 35, page 15. This was a leading halachic authority. He's probably the most accepted because he came latest. And the rule in general in a halachic ruling is that we always go according to the later guy. So if someone came later and he's able to hear all the arguments and say, hey, you know what, I think we could all agree that this makes the most sense, then we usually follow this opinion. So he says, text 35, he writes as follows, page 15. Text 15, page 35, sorry. He says, this is Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. He writes as follows: the case of a seriously ill patient for whom the physicians see no hope of survival using standard drugs is similar to a case of a last resource surgery, which is permitted even though there is a risk that the patient will die immediately as a result. It is therefore permitted to use an unproven drug in this case. So he says that you're able to take the risk really regardless of how much, regardless of how much the risk is. A person can choose to take that risk if they feel it is necessary. So let's do a little review on this answer of how much risk. How much risk should a wish take a ticket of a wish case? What level is justified in taking a risk? So we have, number one, we have Rabbi Grudinsky, who says any risk. As long as there's a possibility that it could bring a cure, the Torah would say, take it. The other opinion says, Rabbi Waldenberg says, no, you got to have some substantial success, rate. If there's, it has to be more than 50%, or the risk of less than 50% death, right? Within any risk, there's two opinions, right? There's some opinions say it has to be only for proven cures. In other words, you have to at least know that there's a cure available. If you don't know that there's a cure and you're just hoping for something like like in the case of Rada, they don't know if it works. It's completely experimental, right? They don't know. So this opinion would say, no, has to be something that you could actually possibly work. Yes, there could be a risk, and any risk you can take, but it has to at least be for something that you know could be there. The other opinion, which is Rabbi Auerbach, says, even for experimental treatments where you don't know that there isn't a cure, he says that you're able to take that risk, and he follows the opinion of Rabbi Grudinsky, who says any risk is worth taking because life is valuable and life is important. So with that, we're going to conclude. Perfect. We're just in time. We're going to conclude here. We're going to bring it back all the way to the very beginning of our case study with Rada. I don't know her last name. Even if I say it, I probably butcher it. It's like an Indian name. But here we go. Rada Ran. I'm not even going to try. Rain Garajan. So he says. So here's the. Here's what he says. We're gonna go through every question here. Number one. Chayei shaah. Is she considered to be in a state of trying to preserve this short-term life? Is she in that state? So we know that, I think that they said she can live up to 8 years. That was the prognosis. So the question is, there's two opinions. It depends who you hold like. If you hold like the opinion that says any terminal illness is considered chayei shaah, that's considered short-term life, then she definitely falls under terminal illness. But if you go according to the opinion that says that it has to be less than 12 months, that the doctor says she can only live less than 12 months, she's definitely going to live more than 12 months. She may not be in the greatest state of health, but she'll definitely live more than 12 months. And according to that opinion, you can't just take any risk because she's going to live longer, and that valuable life is valuable, and you can't take the risk of shortening it. So let's just circle terminal illness there to say that according to that opinion, they would say Rada could take that experimental treatment because it is a terminal illness. Let's continue to the second question we had, which was what about the risk factor? So again, we had two opinions. One opinion said you can take any risk, while the other opinion said it has to be at least a risk of less than 50% of risk, less than 50% death. So in the case of according to the opinion that says it has to be less than 50%, I think we can agree that an experimental treatment is not considered 50%. I think it's just completely up in the air. So you can't say that it has a 50% chance of success because you have no clue. But according to the opinion that says any risk you can take, then they would definitely agree that Rada could take this experimental drug. But even within that, any risk, proven cure, the opinion that says proven cures, it needs to be a proven cure. This experimental drug is definitely not a proven cure. So according to that opinion, they won't be able to take it. But according to the opinion that says experimental treatments, they would be able to take it.
So I wonder what the decision was.
What? So exactly. I mean, they didn't ask a rabbi. They weren't Jewish. But if they would ask a rabbi, then the rabbi would tell them that according to the opinion of Rabbi Grudinsky, who says you can take any risk, and according to Rabbi Auerbach, who says that you can even try it for experimental treatments, you would be allowed, according to the Torah, to take that experimental treatment on Rada because, again, she's terminally ill, even though she will live definitely past 12 months. Because she's terminally ill, she will be able to take that risk. So it's just interesting to note here that, let me see if I missed anything.
It's a hard question.
Yeah, so I just want to wait for Richard. I think this is the kicker. But basically, the idea is that it's very debated. It's not so simple, especially when you start to see all the nuances. I don't know.
Here he is. We're waiting for you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hey. So,
Thank you.
so we were just reviewing everything here.
Yeah.
So basically, we said that there's a lot of opinions here. I'll actually just go back just for a second, real for you. So in the case of Rada, we said that there's two opinions. One opinion says that what's considered a short-term life, what's considered chayei shaah. We said one opinion says terminal illness. The other opinion says that it's anyone who's living who has a prognosis of less than 12 months. In the case of Rada, she was able to live 8 years. So she is considered terminally ill, and therefore, according to that opinion, she would be able to take this experimental drug. And then we said, when it comes to risk, according to the opinion that says you could take any risk, she would be able to take the risk. And within that opinion, according to the opinion who says, even if it's not for proven cures, even experimental drugs you could take. So there's a lot of opinions here. And the point I want to make here is that there's no real consensus, halachic consensus. And therefore, every single person has to really be, evaluated in their own scenario, because it's so debated. And there's so many different factors that have to be, brought into play. It's considerations, exactly. So therefore, it's always important that every case should be really brought to an expert rabbi who knows halachic medical decisions, and as well as a doctor, obviously, and maybe even 3 doctors, to be able to know what the real prognosis is. What does the Torah really say in this specific scenario? What can the patient take? How much risk is it for this patient? And all these important factors. And a rabbi will actually go through everything we just went through today, and probably more, and try to come to a conclusion and say, hey, listen, I think that in this case, it would make sense to either go for it, or say, hey, listen, I think that we should just value the meaningful time that we have left and not jeopardize maybe making it shorter. And of course, it's a very, very emotional and serious question that anyone could have. But I think based on today's lesson, I think that we could all kind of walk away with just this idea that, number one, life is important, and life is valuable. And yes, when it comes to preserving life and extending life, it's important, but it's also just as important not to try and decrease life. And they're both equally important. And we choose to try and we have to basically treat every single circumstance accordingly. Obviously, hopefully with the help of a rabbi.
In other words, there's no concrete answer.
In other words, there's no concrete answer. In other words, this I know, right? We usually don't end off classes like that. What?
Each is an individual.
It really,
case by case.
yes, absolutely. It has to be really individual, case by case basis, and really figure out what can the family take, what can the person handle, and obviously, it all depends on, again, which rabbi you speak to. But I think at the end of the day, we have to realize that everything's in the hand of God, and whatever does happen is meant to happen. So if a person goes to a rabbi and the rabbi says, I think you should take the experimental treatment, and it goes well, and Baruch Hashem, that's what was meant to happen. And if a rabbi says, don't take it, and they live with whatever life they have left, and there's also what they have to accept, and this is what God wants. And obviously, every illness is painful, but this is the Jewish view on life. And there's some reading here you could do, page 38, on the Rebbe's view on life, and then next week we'll see you back here for lesson 2 on what we call extending life. How does Judaism balance the desire to preserve life with concerns of reducing suffering? See how Jewish values inform a dignified approach to end-of-life care and advanced medical
Where's that?
directives. That's lesson 2.
Okay.
Now, I want to point out that from today's lesson, according to everyone, 2 things. According to everyone agrees you do not have an obligation to try an experimental treatment. You don't have an obligation. Even though the Torah says that you have an obligation to pursue a cure, because it poses a danger, everyone agrees you don't have an obligation. You may have the permission, according to some opinions, you can, but everyone agrees you don't have to. If someone says, I don't think this drug will work, according to the Torah, everyone agrees you can say, let's not do it. Let's just let the person live, however long they're going to live. The second point is that according to this lesson, you're not allowed, yeah, I guess you're not, according to the Torah, you wouldn't be allowed to force a company to give over their drug. Why? Because the Torah isn't clear on whether you're allowed to take the drug. It's debated. And because it's debated, you can't force a company to say, give it over. Because again, you are permitted to take it. But if the company says, we're not giving it out, then because you have no obligation to take it, Torah won't demand, obviously, assuming that the company is Jewish, and the guy is Jewish and he follows the Torah, you wouldn't be able to go to the company and say, you have to give us this drug, because it could extend the life. The guy could easily respond, hey, we don't know. It could also shorten a life. And because we don't know and it's debated within Jewish law, the company would not be forced to hand over that drug. So those are just 2 interesting outcomes from today's lesson that are just interesting to point out.